Welcome to the deep dive. Few global conflicts really hold our attention like the Russia-Ukraine war. We're now entering its fourth year, and it's so much more than just the daily headlines.
Absolutely. It's this really dynamic interplay, isn't it? Threats, policy shifts, strategic responses. It impacts everything from international stability to, well, global economic flows.
Exactly. And that's our mission today. We've got a stack of recent sources, news transcripts, deep analyses, and we want to pull out the most important bits of insight for you. Sort of a shortcut to getting properly informed, with maybe some surprising facts along the way.
And we've got a lot to cover. We'll be unpacking Russia's, let's say, escalating stance, both in rhetoric and action. Then there's the big shift in U.S. support under the Trump administration.
Right.
We'll look at how Ukraine is adapting strategically and, crucially, the evolving role of NATO and the European allies. It's a complex picture, definitely. We're here to help connect those dots for you.
Okay, let's dive in. Let's start with Russia's approach. And the thing that always grabs headlines first, nuclear rhetoric. It's not just occasional talk, is it?
No, not at all. Our sources show, get this, over 200 instances where Russian leaders have mentioned nuclear weapons since February 2022.
200, wow.
Yeah, and it goes beyond just words. On November 19th, 2024, President Putin actually approved amendments to Russia's nuclear doctrine.
Okay.
And many experts see this as signaling a lowered threshold for nuclear first use. That's the interpretation.
A lower bar.
Exactly. Plus, they've run military drills, tactical nukes involved with Belarus. And remember, in 2023, they unilaterally pulled their ratification of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty.
Right, the CTBT.
Now, NATO called this dangerous and irresponsible, obviously. But interestingly, U.S. and UK intelligence assessed back in November 2024 that an actual Russian nuclear attack was still unlikely.
Still unlikely, despite the rhetoric and the doctrine changes.
Right. Which raises a really big question for you listening. If these red lines keep getting invoked, maybe even crossed, without that ultimate nuclear response, what does that do? Does it desensitize the West?
Or does it just prove nukes are really only for deterring, truly existential threats?
Precisely. And layered on top of this, you have the whole issue of the Budapest Memorandum from '94, the security assurances Ukraine got for giving up its nukes. Well, the perception is they failed.
Which really undermines the whole non-proliferation idea globally.
Fundamentally, yes. It erodes credibility.
So that's the nuclear angle. But what about warnings related to conventional weapons, the aid flowing into Ukraine?
Yes. Russia's been very sharp on this. They've issued explicit warnings, particularly about long-range missiles. They even mentioned Germany's Taurus system by name.
Saying what exactly?
That supplying these could make NATO countries direct participants in the war. Their logic is that these advanced systems, well, they need Western help to work properly. Satellite data, flight programming, that kind of thing.
They can't operate standalone, basically.
That's the Russian assertion. And Maria Zakharova, the foreign ministry spokesperson, she put it bluntly on July 18th, just this year, 2025. She said Russia might strike NATO nations, even their military bases, if NATO weapons hit Russian soil.
And their justification.
They claim intercepted missiles will reveal their origin. Interestingly, though, when President Trump first announced boosted weapon shipments to Ukraine, the Kremlin's initial reaction was much cooler. Just, this is business.
This is business. That's quite a contrast. Okay, what about the economic side? Sanctions. Are they biting as hard as maybe intended?
Well, it seems Russia has built up a certain resilience. They've kept up substantial oil revenues, especially from big buyers like China and India.
So the money keeps flowing.
To a large extent, yes.
Right.
And our sources show Moscow is now pretty dismissive of new U.S. sanction threats. Again, Zakharova on July 17th said, possible new U.S. sanctions have long ceased to be news to us. And she added firmly, we do not accept threats.
So they project indifference almost.
It suggests a perceived ability to handle the pressure, which is why President Trump's new proposals, these secondary sanctions, or even 100% tariffs, represent a potentially major escalation.
Mm-hmm.
It's an untried tactic to really try and choke off funds.
Right, hitting the countries trading with Russia, that's a different level. Now, beyond the direct conflict and the diplomacy, there's this other layer, the shadow war. What's that about?
Yeah, this is really concerning. We're seeing what looks like an escalating campaign of sabotage, subversion against targets in Europe, even U.S. targets located in Europe. Reports point to Russian military intelligence, the GRU, being behind it.
The GRU, okay.
There's a new database from CSIS, that's the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and it indicates the number of these Russian attacks nearly tripled between 2023 and 2024.
Tripled after already quadrupling the year before.
Exactly, a huge increase. And many targets are directly linked to Western aid for Ukraine. Common tactics, explosives, incendiaries.
Physical sabotage.
Yes. And remember, the cyber stuff has been ongoing since 2014. That's a well-established battleground. But this physical sabotage adds a whole new dimension. It looks like a sophisticated hybrid warfare strategy, destabilize Western societies, deter support for Ukraine.
Okay, so that's a picture of Russia's multifaceted approach. Let's shift gears now and look at the United States. Since January 2025, President Trump has brought in a very different way of handling Ukraine assistance. How's he managing this?
It's a fundamental shift in the funding mechanism. He's been explicit. He won't seek new congressional approval for U.S. military aid money.
No more big packages going through Congress.
Apparently not. Instead, the plan is for new aid packages to be financed by NATO allies. The U.S. provides the weapons, the actual hardware, but the allies pay for it, essentially backfilling their own stocks later.
And how are allies reacting?
Well, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte publicly backed it. He called it totally logical.
Totally logical. Okay, so what kind of aid are we talking about recently, and were there strings attached?
On July 14th, 2025, President Trump announced a new package. Top-of-the-line weapons, he called them. Specifically mentioned Patriot air defense missiles, something Ukraine has been desperately asking for.
Big ticket item.
Very. But it wasn't unconditional. It came with a stringent 50-day ultimatum for Russia to agree to a peace deal.
An ultimatum tied to weapons.
Yes. If no deal by the deadline, Trump threatened tough tariffs. A White House official later clarified that meant 100% tariffs, not just on Russia, but on Russia's trading partners. The stated goal: choke off funds fueling Moscow's war effort.
So using economic threats as leverage for a peace deal alongside the military aid, it sounds potentially unpredictable, though. Has U.S. support been entirely smooth?
Far from it, actually. There was a moment early July 2025 where the administration temporarily suspended some military aid. Patriots included precision-guided weapons, too.
Why?
Pending a Department of Defense capability review was the official reason, but reports say the decision surprised even the White House and State Department. It was reversed quickly, within days, by President Trump himself. But the incident, well, it highlights the potential unpredictability. It could be seen as policy fluctuation or maybe even a leverage tool.
And what about the type of weapons? Any reluctance there?
Yes. President Trump has downplayed sending Ukraine long-range weapons, the kind that could strike deep into Russia. He said, "We're not looking to do that," which fits his self-description as a deal maker, not a war backer.
Right.
And another sign of a shift, the U.S. has stepped back from leading the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, that key coordinating body.
Who's leading it now?
The U.K. and Germany have stepped into that role.
Interesting. This theme of unpredictability, it also touched intelligence sharing, didn't it? That seems critical for Ukraine.
Hugely critical. And yes, on March 3rd, 2025, the U.S. temporarily paused all intelligence sharing with Ukraine.
All of it. For how long?
Just 8 days. It was reversed quickly. But even that short pause apparently significantly hampered Ukraine's ability to conduct precision strikes and track Russian movements. They rely heavily on that real-time targeting data.
Why the pause? What was the thinking?
Sources suggest it was a strategic move by the Trump administration. Pressure on President Zelensky to agree to a 30-day ceasefire with Russia.
Using intelligence as leverage again?
It appears so. And that incident, understandably, caused real concern among key U.S. security partners. The Five Eyes nations, U.S., U.K., Canada, Australia, New Zealand, plus Middle Eastern allies.
Worried about reliability. Or leaks.
Both, reportedly. Concerns about potential intelligence leaks, but also just the reliability of U.S. commitments. Some partners apparently started reassessing their own intelligence sharing agreements with the U.S. because of it.
That's a significant ripple effect. Okay, stepping back from the immediate military aid and intel, what's the overall financial picture? The U.S. commitment has been enormous, hasn't
That's
it?
massive, just staggering numbers. From February 2022 through December 2024, the U.S. allocated something like $182.8 billion in emergency funding for Ukraine and the wider region.
Over $180 billion.
Yeah. And about $83.4 billion of that was already dispersed by the end of 2024, though some is repayable under Lend-Lease. The lion's share, 68%, went to the Department of Defense for security assistance.
Now the rest.
About 22% went to USAI for humanitarian support. As of mid-2025, there is still around $34 billion in appropriations available, mainly for replenishing U.S. military stocks. And the DoD still had authority to transfer weapons directly. Plus, don't forget direct budget support.
Right, money directly to the Ukrainian government.
Exactly. Over $30 billion since 2022, funding things like anti-corruption programs, infrastructure repairs, essential services, keeping the state functioning.
And there's a really interesting twist on this, a long-term economic play for the U.S. Something about reconstruction.
That's right. This is quite significant. On April 30th, 2025, the U.S.-Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund was established. It's framed as a partnership for Ukraine's reconstruction and long-term economic success.
Okay, sounds standard. What's the twist?
The twist is in the details. It notably grants the United States access to Ukraine's valuable rare earth elements, its oil, and its natural gas reserves.
Access. How does that work?
Ukraine has committed to contributing 50% of future royalties from its government-owned natural resources directly into this fund.
50%. So this really changes the dynamic, doesn't it? It's not just aid anymore.
Precisely. It transforms it into a clear long-term economic partnership, and it gives the U.S., frankly, significant leverage in Ukraine's future development.
Okay, so Ukraine is facing these big shifts from its main backer, the U.S., unpredictability, new funding models, economic ties. How are they responding strategically? What's Kyiv doing?
Well, President Zelensky is really doubling down on domestic capabilities. He's strongly emphasized the need for more Ukrainian-made weapons. He convened a big meeting on the defense sector just recently, July 16, 2025.
Building up their own arms industry?
Exactly. It's a strategic pivot towards self-sufficiency. Partly, it's a pragmatic response to the perceived unpredictability of Western aid, but it's also about bolstering long-term defense and enabling Ukraine to, quote, push the war into Russia.
Taking the fight to the aggressor with their own means.
That seems to be the goal, ensuring they have sustained defense capabilities, regardless of the ups and downs in external support.
Makes sense. Now, amidst all this, what about peace talks? Is there any movement? Is Ukraine ready to sit down?
Ukraine's foreign minister has said they are ready for peace talks. He even asserted that a direct meeting between Zelensky and Putin would be the most effective way to achieve a ceasefire.
A direct presidential meeting. But what are their conditions?
That's where it gets tricky. Kyiv has laid out a roadmap, but it includes some absolutely non-negotiable conditions.
Such as?
No restrictions on its military strength, and crucially, no international recognition of Russian sovereignty over parts of Ukraine. They won't trade territory for peace, essentially.
Which sounds like a complete deadlock with Russia's position.
Oh, it really does. Because Russia keeps insisting any ceasefire must address the root causes, their version of them anyway. That means demanding limits on Ukraine's military, a ban on Ukraine joining NATO, and acceptance of territorial losses in the occupied regions.
The same demands they've had for a while.
Pretty much. Previous talks, like one in Istanbul back in June 2025, reportedly made very little progress. Ukraine publicly complained about Russia's unacceptable and unrealistic demands.
So the gob seems fundamental, irreconcilable right now.
That's the assessment, yes. Making a genuinely negotiated peace highly improbable in the short to medium term. And you have to remember, Putin's stated theory of victory.
Which is?
It explicitly relies on outlasting Western support. Keep fighting, make creeping gains, and wait for the West and Ukraine to tire.
Which reinforces that expert assessment you mentioned.
Exactly. The prevailing view is a prolonged war of attrition.
A grim outlook for a quick resolution. Okay, so as the U.S. approach shifts and peace seems distant, what about Europe and NATO? You mentioned they're stepping up. How significantly?
Very significantly. Remember that period in March and April 2025 when the U.S. allocated no new aid?
Yeah.
European countries demonstrably largely filled the gap. In just those 2 months, they committed over 10 billion euros in military aid and nearly another 10 billion in humanitarian and financial aid.
Wow, 20 billion euros in 2 months.
It was the highest combined total for any 2-month period since the war started. So it wasn't just symbolic, it was substantial.
And this isn't just about funding U.S. weapons packages. They're rethinking their own defenses, too.
Absolutely. The current arrangement for the U.S. aid, like the Patriots, requires allies to ship their existing gear to Ukraine and then buy replacements from the U.S. That inherently pushes them to reevaluate their own stocks and needs.
Forcing a rearmament push.
It seems so. European nations are actively increasing defense spending, and NATO allies collectively have agreed to significantly boost defense expenditure, aiming for 5% of GDP within 10 years. That's a huge target.
5%, that's a massive increase for most NATO members.
It demonstrates a critical and accelerating trend towards greater European commitment, and frankly, capacity for self-reliance and security. They see the need.
And that U.S. intelligence pause we talked about that must have fueled this drive for self-reliance too, right?
Yeah.
Especially on the intel side.
Oh, profoundly. It served as a stark warning, as one source put it.
Yeah.
It genuinely worried key partners, the Five Eyes, Middle Eastern allies. We already mentioned some reassessing their intel sharing agreements.
So what's the long-term fix?
It underscored the urgent need for NATO allies to work on closing their own intelligence gaps and for Ukraine to deepen its intelligence partnerships specifically within Europe.
Diversifying their sources.
Exactly. The long-term implication seems to be a push towards a more distributed, resilient intelligence architecture across the alliance, one that's less vulnerable if one major partner, like the U.S., suddenly changes policy.
Building redundancy into the system. Okay, beyond the military aid, the defense spending, the intel, how else is the collective West pushing back against Russia?
There's a broad effort. NATO allies and partners have imposed what they call unprecedented costs through sanctions, diplomatic pressure. Remember, over 750 Russian government officials were expelled from various countries between Feb 2022 and late 2024.
That's a lot of diplomats and officials.
It is. And both NATO and the EU are actively working to strengthen national resilience, hardening critical infrastructure pipelines, warehouses, cyber networks, improving intelligence sharing specifically on these threats, increasing patrols.
Practical measures.
Yes, things like the EU-NATO Task Force on Resilience of Critical Infrastructure or NATO's Baltic Sentry operation. These are concrete steps to protect vital assets from that shadow war we discussed. It's a multifaceted pushback, economic, diplomatic, cyber, trying to impose costs far beyond just the battlefield.
So, looking ahead now, wrapping all these threads together, what are the real flashpoints for escalation? Where could this conflict spill over or intensify further?
Well, there are several clear pathways, unfortunately. Russia continuing to hammer Ukrainian energy infrastructure is one, and there are explicit warnings about long-range Western missiles being supplied that signals potential military escalation.
A pencil trigger.
Could be. At the same time, Ukraine's stated plan to ramp up its own weapons production to push the war into Russia that carries its own escalation risks. It could potentially widen the geography of the conflict.
And the nuclear question hasn't gone away.
No. While intelligence agencies might assess it as unlikely, Russia's constant nuclear rhetoric, combined with those recent doctrinal changes, it keeps the risk of miscalculation or even deliberate escalation on the table. It might be low probability, but the impact would be immense.
And NATO's stance on that.
NATO's been very clear, unified, warning of severe consequences if Russia uses nuclear weapons. The aim is deterrence, preventing that catastrophic step.
Okay, military and nuclear escalation risks. What about the economic front? Those tariffs Trump threatened.
That's a big one. The 100% tariffs, the secondary sanctions targeting Russia's trading partners, if implemented, that's a major potential economic escalation. It's designed to really hit Russia's revenues, especially oil and gas.
Could trigger retaliation from Moscow.
Very possibly. Economic warfare often does. And we can't forget the cyber and hybrid dimensions. Given Russia's escalating shadow war continued, maybe even intensified, cyber attacks and sabotage targeting critical infrastructure, supply chains supporting Ukraine. That seems highly likely.
So it's all interconnected, military, nuclear, economic, cyber, a complex web.
Exactly. It's crucial for you listening to understand these aren't separate boxes. They're intertwined potential triggers and responses.
Given all that, what's the most probable trajectory for the conflict itself? Is there an end in sight, or are we really in for that long haul?
Well, expert analyses consistently point to one scenario as the most likely for 2025-2026, that prolonged war of attrition. JOLBSEC, a think tank, actually signed it about a 31% probability.
A third chance of just grinding on.
Pretty much. And it's largely driven by that Russian theory of victory we mentioned, outlasting Western support, making slow gains, waiting for Ukraine and its backers to run out of steam or will.
And analysts don't see a decisive breakthrough for either side soon.
There seems to be a broad consensus on that, lived likelihood of either Russia or Ukraine achieving a decisive victory in the near future. So for you, thinking about this, the prediction of a prolonged attrition war really reframes it. It becomes an endurance test.
A test of resources, economic resilience.
And critically, political will. For Russia, for Ukraine, and for the Western coalition supporting Kyiv.
Looking even wider now, beyond Europe, what are the global security implications of all this? How is it reshaping the world order?
Well, the shifts in U.S. policy, the aid funding changes, the intelligence pause, they're actively testing NATO's cohesion. It's pushing Europe towards greater strategic autonomy, more self-reliance.
Which could be good in the long run. A stronger Europe.
It could ultimately lead to a stronger European defense capability, yes. But there's also a risk of fragmentation if those internal alliance dynamics aren't managed really carefully.
And Russia's actions themselves. The annexations, the nuclear threats.
They fundamentally challenge the post-World War II international rules-based order, undermining non-proliferation efforts, setting dangerous precedents for territorial integrity.
And Russia's trying to leverage this globally.
Absolutely. They're actively positioning themselves as a sort of anti-colonial force, trying to tap into anti-Western sentiment, particularly in the global South, to build influence with both the public and political leaders there.
So we're seeing signs of a more fragmented, maybe multipolar world emerging from this.
It certainly points in that direction, yes. A less cohesive international order.
So to wrap up our deep dive today, it's a really complex, fast-moving situation. We've looked at Russia's tactics, the threats, the shadow war. We've seen the major shifts in U.S. support, how Ukraine's adapting by focusing on self-sufficiency, and how Europe is stepping up its security role.
And the bottom line seems to be a conflict stuck in a protracted war of attrition. Deep disagreements make a diplomatic fix unlikely anytime soon, leading to this environment of, well, sustained instability and unpredictability.
Yeah, the implications really are vast. Testing NATO, challenging global norms like non-proliferation, potentially reshaping alliances worldwide.
It's definitely more than just a regional conflict. It feels like a catalyst, doesn't it? Forcing a broader rethink of global power dynamics, where influence lies in the 21st century.
So the final thought for you listening. We see Europe moving towards more self-reliance, this rise of the shadow war, the diplomatic deadlock continuing. What does this mean for the future of alliances? Especially when deterrence seems to rely less just on military might and more on things like economic leverage, cyber resilience, and just sheer political endurance. What factor do you think will be most critical for stability in the landscape that's emerging? Something to definitely chew on as you navigate our increasingly complex world.